There are some games that are just made to be played in the arcades. It could be because the control scheme favours a fancy custom cabinet. It might be because the graphical fidelity requires hardware well beyond the home consoles of the era. It may be because the gameplay lends itself to short, explosive bursts of activity, rather than sustained play. In the case of T-Mek, it was all of the above. T-Mek is a futuristic vehicular combat game, in which players select their hover tank of choice, then proceed to try and blast the other players to smithereens in the arena. This is a game that was born and bred for play in the arcade, echoing the glory days of Atari's golden era. T-Mek features a distinctive, eye-catching cabinet design and control scheme, whilst the seats would rumble to ensure that the game was as immersive as possible. The game also used a form of surround sound, which was dubbed cage audio. Basically, it positioned 2 speakers in front of the player, then 2 more behind them. A subwoofer was mounted below as well, adding depth to the audio quality. More than just presentation, this setup was essential to how the game was to be played, but more on that later. T-Mek's gameplay is relatively simple, but scratches the same itch that other full-bodied arcade shooters tend to aim for. Mechs have special weapons and abilities that add variety to the gameplay, but the core of the game is streamlined and slick. Once you select your mech, you are dropped straight into the arena and need to act quickly to avoid your own destruction. The game's graphics are highly detailed for the era, with the tanks looking reasonably crisp, regardless of whether they're on the other side of the arena or right up in your face. The use of scaling sprites for the 3D environment has its drawbacks, particularly when it comes to depth. The combination of relatively low-detailed backgrounds and the slippery nature of the hover tanks sometimes makes it difficult to keep track of where you are relative to your opponents. This can work in the game's favour in terms of intensifying the chaotic atmosphere, but it can be frustrating when you're actually trying to win. It must be said that the engine and the hardware itself was a step behind many of the premier arcade releases that year. This would have been particularly evident when you saw it next to a game like Daytona USA, which released worldwide in the same window of time. T-Mek's presentation was designed to be bombastic, but was held back somewhat by the hardware that underpinned it. The developers also made an unconventional decision regarding the game's sound as well. The cage audio system was set up to ensure that positional sound could be used. This was not a superficial choice, but instead was essential to the gameplay. By listening carefully to where the sounds were coming from, you would be able to keep track of where your opponents were in the arena. It helped to immerse the player in the world, ensuring that they use their ears as well as their eyes. Any distractions would come from elsewhere in the arcade though, since the game does not feature background music during the game. This is another departure, as most games from that era would pump something through, even if the player would rarely hear it in busy arcades. The lack of music ensures that the player is entirely focused on the sounds of the battle, upping the intensity of the game exponentially. It's pretty clear then that T-Mek's arcade strengths lay in the way the gameplay was interwoven with the unique design of the cabinet. So, how would the game fare without the cage audio and custom controls? The answer is not too well, unfortunately. T-Mek saw a home release on the PC as well as the 32X. Neither version is particularly inspiring, even before you factor in the loss of the custom cabinet. The world had moved into the age of 3D polygons, and T-Mek's method of scaling 2D sprites on a 3D plane looked positively ancient in comparison. The multiplayer was also disappointing, with the slow split-screen mode satisfying no one. There was supposedly a port of the game in development for the Jaguar as well, which is not surprising given this was an Atari game in the first place. However, it never saw the light of day. It's not a huge surprise that the home versions of T-Mek did not evoke the same response as the arcade title did. So much of what made the game was tied into the experience of climbing into the seat and wrangling your tank into firing range of your opponents amidst a flurry of explosions all around you. Asking for the home ports to deliver the same experience was like asking an NBA player to dunk after chopping their hands off. You're just kidding yourself.